My name is Anissa Michaels, and today I'll be talking about assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is the process by which an individual who may otherwise be incapable is provided with the means, either drugs or commitment, to commit suicide. In some cases, the terms aid in dying or death with dignity are preferred. These terms are often used to draw a distinction from suicide. In some legal jurisdictions, suicide, whether assisted or not, remains illegal, while aid in dying is permitted. It's also called euthanasia, which means it's referred to an act that ends a life in a painless manner. It's usually performed by someone other than the patient. This may include withholding common treatments resulting in death, removal of the patient from life support, or the use of lethal substances, or forces to end the life of the patient. This is basically what I just said about what assisted suicide is. It's my PowerPoint slide. It's very pretty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. Next, I'm going to talk about assisted suicide in the U.S. It's legal in 3 states, which is Oregon, Montana, and Washington. I'll be also talking about the assisted suicide movement of 1906 and Dr. Kevorkian. The first significant drive to legalize assisted suicide in the United States arose as part of the eugenist movement in the early years of the 20th century. In a 2004 article in the Bulletin of the History of Medicine, Brown University historian Jacob M. Appeal documented extensive political debate over legislation to legalize physician-assisted suicide in both Iowa and Ohio in 1906. In Ohio, the legislation was inspired by the campaign of heiress Anna S. Hall, whose mother had a painful death from cancer. Despite Hall's efforts, the bill was rejected by the Ohio legislature by a vote of 79 to 23. In the United States, aid in dying was brought to public attention in the 1990s with the highly publicized case of Dr. Jack Kevorkian. Dr. Kevorkian assisted over 40 people in committing suicide in Michigan. His first public assisted suicide was Janet Atkins, an elderly female who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1989. He was charged with murder, but charges were dropped on December 13, 1990, because there were no Michigan laws outlining suicide or the medical assistance of it, so he was not in violation of the law. Years later, Kevorkian crossed the line from assisting the patient to actively killing the patient himself. Kevorkian videotaped himself giving a man a lethal injection and aired the tape on 60 Minutes. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and served 8 years of a 10 to 25-year sentence. He was released in 2007. As I said before, assisted suicide is legal in 3 American states. For Oregon, you have to have a physician prescribe medication, but it must be self-administered. The prognosis must be for a lifespan of 6 months or less. The person must be a resident of Oregon. A written request for a prescription and 2 oral requests from the patient is also needed to escape criminal liability, plus written confirmation by a doctor that the act is voluntary and informal. This came about because of the court case Gonzalez v. Oregon. Because of this, Oregon now has the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. It exempts from civil or criminal liability state licensed physicians whom, in compliance with the act, specifies safeguards, dispenses, or prescribes a legal dose of drugs upon the request of a terminally ill patient. This is still in ruling, but since 2001, the Attorney General is trying to get it to be outlawed, but still there has been no court decision on that. In 1994, the Washington State chapter of the Hemlock Society introduced Initiative 119 as an amendment to Washington's 1979 Natural Death Act. The ballot questions asked if terminally ill adults should be allowed to receive physician aid in dying. This initiative was very controversial. Supporters of the initiative advised cancer patients' statements of wanting a dignified death. Opponents invoked fear in the public by saying the initiative would allow doctors to kill patients. The initiative failed, only receiving 40% of the vote. However, Washington Initiative 1000 was approved on November 4, 2008, election by 57.82% of Washington state voters. The provision allows an adult Washington resident who has a 6-month predicted survival to self-administer lethal medication prescribed by a physician. Assisted suicide was made legal in Montana through a court ruling, case of Baxter versus Montana. Just like some other states, the Attorney General was trying to seek, they don't want it, so he's trying to get it outlawed. Now I'm going to talk about the attitude of healthcare professionals, how they feel about it. Talking about healthcare professionals, factors that include physicians' attitude towards physical assisted death, factors that influence doctors' decision to end-of-life care, and improvements in end-of-life decision-making. A 1997 survey conducted by David A. Ash and Michael L. D.K. surveyed 1,139 United States critical care nurses about their attitudes towards physician-assisted suicide. The survey sought out to explain the reasons why some critical care nurses had favorable attitudes toward euthanasia, while others did not. One obvious explanation for why some nurses have sympathetic tendencies toward euthanasia is because some see euthanasia as a legitimate response to end human suffering. However, Ash and DeKay cited additional factors that influence both healthcare professional attitudes toward euthanasia, including religion and age. Religious and age, gender, and previous experience with physician-assisted suicide in work environment are all factors which include healthcare professionals' attitudes towards physically assisted death. The study found that nurses who had previously been a participant in physician-assisted death were younger, less religious, and more likely to be male. Second study conducted in Australia on an end-of-life treatment reported results that those who are more likely to oppose physician-assisted death are older, Western-educated, Catholic, and female. Of the nurses included in the study, 19% previously reported participating in physician-assisted death, 76 reported never having engaged in it, and 4% of the response were classified. Those who have previously engaged in euthanasia were more likely to respond to the survey that they felt passive in active euthanasia or ethical practices. Next on my PowerPoint is, should an incurably ill patient be able to commit physician-assisted suicide? Well, we're getting to this, and I feel that you should be allowed. I just had to go through this with my pap, rest his soul, and I would never, ever want to see something like that again. I would do it in a heartbeat. It is hard to go through that. Everyone sitting in front of me just had to go through it, and let me tell you, it's the hardest thing ever. I believe that you should be allowed. I believe that tremendous pain and suffering would be gone. I believe the right to die should be a fundamental freedom of each person. Patients can die with dignity rather than having the illness reduce them to a shell of their former selves, which we all just went through with that. Healthcare costs could be reduced, which would save estates and lower insurance premiums. Nurse and doctor time can be freed up to work on patients who can be saved. This is what we had to go through with this too. Pain and anguish of the patient's family and friends can be lessened, and they can say their final goodbyes. I believe that this should be in effect in every state. I would do it, no question, none. It's hard to watch your loved ones sit there in pain and not be able to help them. And even if they're in pain, they still could commit suicide, and I'd rather just see them die with dignity and die without any pain. Rest his soul, I love you and I miss you.